One thing I'll say about Rings of Power is that it keeps finding new and creative ways to destroy my faith in modern entertainment, and I think the best example of this is the latest episode, Doomed to Die, which is kind of an ironic title when you think about it because it pretty much describes the show's chances of success, but whatever. On the face of it, this episode should be the one time when Rings of Power finally gets to excel. Yeah, maybe it's not so hot when it comes to dialogue, character development, story progression, spatial awareness, world building, logic, reason, acting, costumes, or set design, but surely to goodness, with all the money they have at their disposal, they can at least take a couple of CGI armies and bash them against each other in something that vaguely resembles an exciting battle. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Instead, what we got was a confused, boring, tedious, laughably incoherent mess of disconnected events and desperate member berries that went on forever, had no clear sense of progression or overall stakes, and generally squandered what should have been the show's greatest opportunity to shine. Honestly, how can you fuck up something as simple as this? Anyway, because I'm all about making the world a better place, one drunken rant at a time, I thought it might be interesting to compare and contrast this on-screen battle with one that actually worked well. In this case, the Battle of Helms Deep from the Two Towers. Why exactly did I choose that one? Well, one, because it's fucking awesome, but two, because the general setup and disposition of both battles is broadly similar. In both cases, a limited number of defenders have to hold a fortified position against a superior orc army throughout the night until reinforcements can arrive the following morning to relieve them. The difference though is in the execution, and this is where one becomes a tense, action-packed and extremely well-paced conflict that brings the dramatic tension to a perfect climax.
Oh, yes!
Before ending with a big emotional payoff, and the other one becomes doomed to die. So what exactly makes Helms Deep such a good battle? Well, in my humble opinion, in order for a battle to work effectively, it needs to deliver three main elements. 1. A logical battlefield that the audience can easily track. 2. Understandable objectives for both sides. 3. A clear, logical sense of progression. Sounds easy, right? Well, let's run this up against Helms Deep and see how it measures up. First of all, we need a logical battlefield to work on. The fortress of Helms Deep is located at the end of a steep valley, meaning there's only one way for an enemy to assault the place, and the two towers make sure that we get a good view of the fortifications well in advance so that we know the layout of the place pretty effectively. There's the curtain wall with an open space behind it where the bulk of the defenders can assemble, the main fortress with its gate and approach ramp where they can fall back to if the walls get breached, and finally the citadel where they can make their last stand if the shit really hits the fan. It's logical, easy to follow and map out in your head, and has obvious layers of defense that anyone can understand. Then there's part 2, objectives. Well, again, this one's simple enough. The defenders know that Gandalf has gone to round up reinforcements to relieve the siege and promises to return by dawn the following day. So their objective is basically just to hold out until he gets there. The orcs, on the other hand, have an equally simple objective: break into the fortress and kill everything that they see. Every action that they take is oriented towards that goal. Lastly, there's number 3, the idea of progression. A good on-screen battle should have an ebb and flow to it. Throughout the battle, the audience should have a good sense of which side is winning and losing, which army is in a stronger position, and what each little victory or loss means to the overall battlefields. Helms Deep absolutely excels at this, because we know right from the start that the defenders are badly outnumbered, and their only real hope is the fortifications that stand between them and the massive orc army bearing down on them. As a result, the defensive walls must be held at all costs, and from the orc point of view, they have to be overcome at all costs. So the orcs assault the walls, try to scale them with ladders. The defenders hold them off for a while before the orcs breach the wall with explosives. Holy shit, that's something that nobody accounted for. Now the orcs are inside the walls. The defenders counterattack them and drive them back at great cost, but there's too many to hold off for long, forcing them to fall back inside the fortress. Now their defensive power has been weakened because most of their archers are dead. Now the orcs assault the fortress by ramming the main gate, and again they're pushed back temporarily, but they can't be stopped for long. Now the handful of defenders that remain are holed up inside the Great Hall. It's almost dawn, but they're out of time and resources, and rather than wait for the end to come, they instead decide to make a suicidal charge into the enemy, hoping to buy some time for the women and children behind them to escape. And at the last moment, when all seems lost, Gandalf finally arrives to save the goddamn day. There's a logical, easy to follow progression to the battle. Both sides make smart and in some cases pretty inventive actions to pursue their goals. Because you know the layout of the battlefield, the objectives of both sides and the relative strength of the two armies, it becomes easy to follow. You know where everyone is at any given time, and you can feel the growing desperation as the defenders are pushed back and back. It's great stuff that accomplishes everything a battle like this needs to, and for those reasons, it becomes an absolutely gripping spectacle. Nice one, Peter Jackson. Now let's consider the Battle of Eregion in the Rings of Power. First up, what's the layout of the battlefield? Well, straight away we're getting into kind of murky territory because the full geography of the area is never really depicted. As best I can tell, you've got the city with a defensive wall and a river that surrounds it on two sides, but then there's mountains and forests and stuff behind it. Are there walls there too? I don't know. Could the orcs theoretically assault from that direction? Maybe, we'll never really know. The orc army itself is positioned roughly in the forest on the other side of the river, which creates a visual problem for the viewer because there's no sense of the size and disposition of the opposing forces. Are there lots of orcs there? I guess so, because they'd have to know they're assaulting a major city, but we never get to see the full army out in the open, so I've got no real idea. I don't know how much of a threat this army actually poses to the defenders. And on that subject, I don't actually know how many elves are defending Eregion either, because they're never shown in their totality, but considering it's one of their biggest and most important cities, I'd have to assume there's a pretty strong force deployed there. The upshot is that compared to the small group of old men and boys defending Helms Deep, there's none of the tension and dread we experienced at that battle, because all we have so far are two armies of unknown size facing off against each other. And it gets even more complicated when Elrond and his army arrive by cavalry to assault the orcs from behind, which should be an absolute disaster for them, but instead it becomes just another component of an increasingly confused battle when they get stopped in their tracks by the appearance of Galadriel as a hostage. And this is where we're getting into motivational territory, so let's move on to part 2, shall we? Understandable objectives for both sides. So the basic setup here is that Sauron has infiltrated Eregion so that he can forge the Rings of Power. The orcs are here to break in and kill Sauron, and Elrond is here to kill the orcs and then somehow get in and kill Sauron as well. Kind of feels like overlapping objectives here if I'm honest. But because the orcs have Galadriel as a prisoner, he can't attack them directly or they'll just execute her. But then they have a conference, because that's totally something that you can do in the middle of a siege, and as best as I can tell, the bargaining session ends with Elrond walking out and saying, well, we're just gonna go ahead and kill you anyway, so you better watch out. Which begs the question, why allow him to leave at all then? You might as well just kill the guy right there and eliminate an important enemy commander. Also, if Galadriel is clearly no use as a hostage, then you should probably just execute her too, instead of leaving her alone and lightly guarded so that she can escape later and fuck up your plans. Not to mention the fact that it's Sauron who's the biggest threat to both sides. I mean, if everyone involved is only really here because they want him dead, then why not work together to take him out and then sort the rest out later? The objectives of both sides here are as muddied and confused as the rest of the battle, and believe me, it only gets worse from here. Which brings me on to part 3, a logical sense of progression. As I said earlier, the objective for Adar and the orcs is to fight their way inside Eregion so they can find Sauron and kill the shit out of him. To do that, they have to cross the river, breach the walls and fight their way through the city until they can get to him. And this is where I pretty much lost what's left of my sanity, because in order to cross the river, they decide to bombard the mountains nearby with trebuchets, which causes them to collapse and block the river, instantly turning it into an open field that they can easily move infantry and siege engines across.
Son of a bitch!
Mountains do not work like this. It would be like me punching an oak tree with my bare fists and expecting it to collapse. Rivers don't work like this either. Even if the mountain did somehow collapse into it, where the fuck do you think all the water would go then? Would it just like give up and go home? Lastly, riverbeds don't work like this either. Even if all that other stupid shit actually happened, the riverbed would be an impassable quagmire of deep mud and silt for weeks if not months months afterwards. There's no way you'd be able to get infantry across it, never mind gigantic siege engines. Anyway, whatever, let's just go with it so we can get through this. So the orcs cross the magical bullshit river, and now their job is to breach the walls, which they do with the world's least practical siege engine. I don't even really know how to explain this thing because I've never seen anything remotely like it. The best I can say is that it somehow hooks into the walls and yanks bits out of it. It takes forever to set up, it can only be used like once an hour, and it's made mostly of wood and is completely exposed to defensive fire from above. I mean, literally a couple of pots of burning oil and this thing is toast. But conveniently enough, nobody tries that so that the rest of the plot can happen. While all this stupid shit's going on, Elrond's army seems to be fighting the orcs in Woodland on horseback.
Oh, come on!
Now, I'm no military expert, but even I can tell you that the one place you absolutely don't want to send a massed cavalry force is into dense woodland where they can't charge effectively, can get bogged down in rough terrain and easily ambushed, and the horses and riders can easily collide with trees and low branches. It completely negates the purpose of even using cavalry. I mean, damn man, I can only imagine how Shad must be losing his mind over stuff like this. And because the defenders of the city can't easily see them, it never occurs to them to send out an infantry assault to support them, which in theory could have caught the orc army between two powerful forces and absolutely crushed them. As a viewer, it also means that I'm never entirely sure where they are compared to the front lines of the siege, how many there are, or whether they're even making much of an impact on the overall battle. Gilgalad is apparently there too, but I don't know what he's doing most of the time, or even who's in overall command of the elf army. The battle, which was already on shaky ground from a narrative point of view, has basically devolved into a bunch of smaller actions, none of which have any connection to each other or contribute to an overall understanding of what's going on. Then there's the ridiculous stuff that either has setup with no payoff or tries to fake a payoff with no setup. Like at one point Adar sends in a big troll thing to fuck up the elf army, knowing it's going to cause a lot of collateral damage, and it's built up as this big imposing threat, but then it just kind of dies without really accomplishing anything. So like, what was the point of that? Or Asian elf lady, because I don't even know if she has a name at this point, who gets turned into a human pincushion but bravely gets up one last time to destroy the weird battering ram thing. Because remember Boromir? Remember how awesome his last stand was because he kept getting shot and standing up again and just refusing to quit? Well, it's just like that, except she's even more badass because she gets shot with even more arrows. The problem is, Boromir's death actually meant something beyond a guy taking a lot of punishment. It was a last act of redemption for a man who had almost fallen into darkness and was given everything he had to protect his friends one last time, going out as the hero that he always aspired to be. This, on the other hand, is just some random chick whose name I don't even know and don't care about, destroying a piece of siege equipment that seems to be doing fuck all anyway, in a battle that I don't particularly understand because it's so convoluted and poorly thought out. They are not the same thing. And lastly, there's the climax of the battle, where Adar himself leads the orc army in a final assault against the city. It should have been a thrilling moment, but again, I was confused about the dynamics at play here because the show won't give me an overall sense of progression. Was this a triumphant general leading his army to victory because he knows he has the decisive advantage? Or is it a desperate gamble by a leader who senses the battle turning against him, like Napoleon throwing the old guard into one last attack at Waterloo? I don't know, because just like every other aspect of this battle, it's muddied by a complete lack of clarity in the writing and direction. The end result is that by every possible metric I can judge it on, the Battle of Eregion falls short of everything they did in the Two Towers, which was made more than 20 years earlier and probably on a smaller budget. It's hard to follow, the objectives are poorly defined and realised, the geography of the battlefield is vague at best, the decisions made by both sides are nonsensical, and the emotional payoffs fall flat because nothing it does is earned. And really, it's a perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with Rings of Power, how it fails to even accomplish the things that it should find easy, and it's just another reason why this story is being told by the most incompetent people imaginable. To paraphrase the late great John Hammond of Jurassic Park, our franchise is in your hands and you have butterfingers. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.